Okay, so are you ready to dive into some like really murky waters?
Always up for a challenge.
All right, well, today we're going to be talking about El Yunque. Um, have you heard much about this group?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those organizations that's shrouded in so much mystery. Always makes for a fascinating deep dive, though.
For sure. And it's been a while since we've tackled something this secretive. So you guys sent over a ton of great sources on this. A lot of it is from this book called El Yunque, The Ultra Right in Power by Alvaro Delgado. Have you read this one?
Yeah, it's a pretty wild ride. Really lays out the history and the beliefs of this group. No punches pulled.
Right. So our mission today is to kind of figure out like how much influence does El Yunque actually have, especially in modern day Mexican politics, because I feel like there's so much we don't know about them.
Yeah, and that's what makes them so intriguing. I mean, are they this powerful force pulling strings behind the scenes, or are they just a relic of the past? That's what we're going to try to unpack today.
I love it.
Right.
Okay, so Delgado, the author of the book we mentioned,
Mhm.
he takes a very matter-of-fact approach in the book. Like he just kind of lays out the facts, doesn't really editorialize, kind of lets the reader draw their own conclusions, which I think is kind of the best way to approach something like this.
Right. Let the evidence speak for itself.
Exactly, exactly. But, reading through some of these sources, I mean, some of the stuff is pretty wild, like
Mhm.
secret initiation ceremonies, militant training. It's like straight out of a spy novel.
Yeah, when you delve into the history of El Yunque, it becomes pretty clear that this is not your typical political organization. I mean, to really understand just how intense the level of commitment is, we should probably start with this firsthand account of an initiation ceremony from 1982.
Oh, okay, so like set the scene for me. Where are we? What's happening?
So imagine a dimly lit schoolroom in Leon, Guanajuato. A young man, he's standing before a table that's covered with a crucifix, a Bible, a rosary. There are two flags on either side of the table. One is the Mexican flag, and the other is this stark white flag with a black Y on a red background.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's the symbol of El Yunque, right? The Y.
Exactly. It's a powerful image. And this young man, he's about to take an oath of loyalty to El Yunque. He's vowing to uphold their values, to obey their commands no matter what.
Okay, wow. So what does this oath actually say? Like, what are they pledging?
Well, the book highlights two phrases that really kind of send chills down your spine, when you read them. One is friends and brothers or implacable judges, and the other is a Latin phrase, utim cusperscusa, which basically means stand firm.
Wow. Friends and brothers or implacable judges. That's pretty heavy. I mean, it definitely suggests that, there's no room for dissent. Like you're either with them or against them.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a very stark choice they present. And that second phrase, the Latin stand firm, that really underscores their unwavering commitment to their ideology. It suggests they're willing to go to great lengths to achieve their goals.
Yeah, it's kind of ominous, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so where does this intense ideology come from? How did El Yunque even like begin?
Well, their roots go back to the 1950s, a time when Cold War paranoia was really at its peak. Anti-communist sentiment was incredibly strong, especially within the Catholic Church.
Okay, so that makes sense. Like this fear of communism spreading.
Right, exactly. And certain figures within the church, people like Bishop Octaviano Marquez de Torres, they really played a significant role in shaping El Yunque's early ideology.
So it's this like really potent mix of religious zeal and political ideology, all kind of fueled by these global anxieties.
Precisely. And this is where student groups come into play. Groups like the FUA, the Frente Universitario Anticomunista, they were hotbeds for El Yunque's early activities. They provided a platform for recruitment, for ideological indoctrination.
So they're like basically planting the seeds of El Yunque within these student groups,
Yeah.
shaping like young minds, building a base for their future operations.
Exactly. But to understand how they went from these, relatively small student groups to this organization that supposedly holds so much power, you have to look at their structure.
Okay, so how are they organized? What makes them so different?
Well, Delgado describes this hierarchical cell structure, very compartmentalized, designed for secrecy. Members operate under pseudonyms.
Okay, so it's like a secret society within a secret society.
You got it. And this structure, it was heavily influenced by one of El Yunque's key figures, Ramon Plata Moreno. It made it incredibly difficult for outsiders to penetrate their ranks.
Ah, so that's how they've managed to stay under the radar for so long.
Exactly. And their recruitment process, that was just as rigorous. Potential recruits had to fill out this really detailed prospect form. It outlined not just their political beliefs, but also their family background, personality traits, even physical characteristics.
Wow, really?
Mm.
It's like they're trying to create an army of, like, ideologically pure soldiers.
Yeah, there's a definite element of that. You're picking up on a key aspect here. It's not just about believing in the right things, it's about action. It's about molding individuals who are ready to fight for their cause.
Okay, so that brings us to the training, right? I mean, we touched on it earlier, but it sounds pretty intense. What are we talking about here? Like actual combat training?
Yeah, it's definitely not your average political activism.
No, definitely not.
Delgado uncovered details about these really rigorous training regimens, both physical and ideological. They'd gather in remote locations like the Sierra de Lobos camps or attend courses at the Colegio Benavente in Puebla.
So it's like boot camp for El Yunque recruits.
In a way, yeah. And we're talking weapons training, martial arts, even, psychological tests designed to assess their courage and their resilience.
Wow, that's pretty hardcore. So they're really serious about this.
Dead serious. I mean, there's even this baptism ritual. It involves these, simulated combat scenarios to test their reactions under pressure.
Oh, wow. Okay, I think I'm starting to understand why El Yunque has been so difficult to pin down. This is some next level commitment.
Absolutely. And it begs the question, what are they preparing for? I think that leads us into the heart of their ideology.
Yeah, I mean, this is all fascinating, but what's the point? What do they actually want?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, and that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig a little deeper into the world of El Yunque. Last time we left off talking about their pretty intense training, which honestly sounds more like something out of a spy movie than a political organization.
Yeah. It's definitely not your typical grassroots activism, is it?
No, not at all. So to understand why they go to such lengths, I think we need to get into the ideology that drives them. What's the big idea?
Yeah, because all this secrecy, all this training, it has to be fueled by some pretty powerful beliefs, right?
Right.
So at the core of it all is this really fervent anti-communism, almost like a religious conviction.
Okay, so it's more than just disagreeing with a political system. It's like a cosmic battle between good and evil.
Exactly. They see the world as this battleground, right? And
Yeah.
for them, communism represents the ultimate evil force.
Wow. Okay. So where does this worldview come from?
Well, it draws heavily from certain interpretations of Catholic teachings. They view events like the Mexican Revolution, for example, as diabolical, orchestrated by Masonic forces who they see as enemies of the church.
Okay, wait. So can you back up for a sec? Remind me, who are the Freemasons?
Yeah, so Freemasonry, it's a fraternal organization, it's been around for centuries, and it's often been the target of these conspiracy theories, especially from folks who see it as a threat to traditional religious authority.
Got it. Okay, so basically El Yunque is tapping into this historical narrative of this struggle between good and evil, and they see themselves as the defenders of Christianity against these enemies.
Exactly. And that explains their admiration for figures like Francisco Franco, the Spanish dictator.
Uh-huh.
He violently suppressed leftist movements. And they also look up to some South American dictators who were known for their brutal anti-communist regimes.
Okay, hold on. They admire dictators. That seems kind of at odds with the whole idea of a democratic Mexico, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a tricky issue, and it's one that's raised a lot of questions about their true intentions.
Right.
Their admiration for these authoritarian figures, it suggests that they might desire a strong, centralized state, one that aligns with their very specific interpretation of Catholic values, even if it means maybe curtailing certain democratic freedoms.
So their vision is less about individual liberty and more about imposing a particular moral order on society.
Yeah.
Even if it means sacrificing some democratic principles.
That's one interpretation, and it's definitely caused concern among those who see El Yunque's influence as potentially dangerous, a threat to Mexican democracy.
Right. Okay. So we've got this group, right? They're super secretive. They've got this really rigid ideology, history of pretty intense training, but they're not operating in a vacuum, right? How do they navigate the broader political landscape in Mexico?
Right, and it's important to remember that even within the right wing in Mexico, things aren't always so unified. There are these internal conflicts, rivalries.
Okay, so give me an example. What kind of conflicts are we talking about?
Well, there was this pretty significant split between El Yunque and another right-wing group called the Tecos.
Okay.
And it all came down to, get this, papal authority.
Wait, they split over the Pope?
Yep. The book that kind of triggered the whole thing was called The Montinian Church. It was critical of certain aspects of the papacy.
Okay.
And El Yunque saw this as like a direct challenge to the church's authority. But the Tecos, they were more open to questioning some aspects of church doctrine.
So even within this, this world of anti-communism, there are these nuances, these disagreements that can lead to some serious fractures.
Exactly. And this is important because it shows how even groups with shared goals can break apart, over these ideological differences. And it can create opportunities for certain figures to rise up within these movements.
Okay, so tell me about one of those figures. Who emerges from this infighting?
Well, one key figure is José Manuel Pareda Crespo. He founded the Crusaders of Christ the King. This group was really embedded within the Catholic Church, and they helped to really further El Yunque's influence within religious circles.
So it's like they're using the church as a platform to spread their ideology and gain power.
Yeah, you could say that. And Pareda Crespo himself, he was known for emphasizing obedience as like the ultimate virtue.
Right, which aligns perfectly with El Yunque's whole friends and brothers or implacable judges thing.
Exactly. So yeah, this focus on obedience and loyalty, it helped them gain a foothold within the church. But their ultimate goal was always political power.
Okay, so they've got this ideology, this network, a growing influence within the church. What's the next move? How do they translate all this into actual political power?
Well, their strategy was to target the PAN, the Partido Acción Nacional, one of the major political parties in Mexico. They saw the PAN as like a vehicle to achieve their political goals. And they infiltrated it through various organizations like DHIA, the Mexican Democratic Action, ANSAFEM, the National Civic Federation of Mexican Women, and Provida, the pro-life group.
So they're not just joining the PAN as individual members. They're setting up these front organizations to push their agenda from within.
Right. And it speaks to their understanding of power dynamics. They weren't interested in flashy protests or public declarations. They were focused on infiltrating institutions, shaping policy from the inside.
So they're like political puppeteers.
In a way, yeah. Working behind the scenes to make things happen.
So did they succeed? Did they manage to actually gain influence within the PAN?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll look at the evidence of their influence both in the past and today, and we'll consider what it all means for Mexican democracy.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive on El Yunque. We've uncovered their origins, their ideology, their methods. And now the question is, did they succeed? I mean, do they still hold power in Mexican politics today?
That's the question, isn't it? The question that's fueled so many investigations and sparked so much debate.
Right.
And it's a question made even more difficult by their love of secrecy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like trying to track ghosts, right? They operate in the shadows.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to assess their impact?
Well, we have to look for clues, right? For traces of their ideology, their methods, within the corridors of power.
Okay.
Delgado's book, along with other sources, they point to a number of high-ranking PAN figures with alleged ties to El Yunque. People like Luis Felipe Bravo Mena, he served as president of the PAN, and Ana Teresa Aranda, she held prominent positions in the PAN and the Mexican government.
So we're talking about people who've reached the highest levels of government, potentially shaping policies, influencing decisions. But how do we know for sure if these individuals are actually acting on behalf of El Yunque?
Yeah.
It's not like they're, wearing a badge or announcing their affiliations.
Right. You rarely find a smoking gun, an explicit order or directive linking a specific policy to El Yunque's agenda. Their influence, it's often more subtle, more about shaping the discourse, influencing maybe the selection of candidates, promoting a certain worldview within the party.
So it's less about direct control and more about creating an environment where their ideology can flourish, where their values become embedded in the party's DNA.
Exactly.
But haven't things changed in Mexico? I mean, it's a more democratic society now than it was back in, the 1950s. Surely El Yunque has had to adapt its tactics.
Yeah, you're right. Mexico has gone through some really significant political and social changes since El Yunque's early days. They can't operate with the same kind of overt militancy they once did. Their methods have likely evolved.
Okay, so what does this new, like, evolved form of influence look like?
Well, think tanks, policy groups, media outlets. These are the arenas where El Yunque's ideology might be, quietly shaping the political landscape.
Mhm.
They might be funding research that promotes their worldview, supporting candidates who align with their values, using media platforms to spread their ideas.
It's a much more subtle approach, but it's arguably more effective in a democratic society.
Yes.
Instead of forcing their views on people, they're trying to persuade them to win hearts and minds.
Right.
But this raises some pretty serious ethical questions about transparency and accountability. If a group with this rigid ideology and a history of secrecy is operating behind the scenes, how can citizens hold them accountable?
That's the core issue, isn't it? I mean, in a democracy, we rely on transparency. We rely on accountability to make sure that power is being wielded responsibly. But when a group like El Yunque is operating in the shadows, it undermines those very principles.
Yeah, it creates this unsettling feeling that decisions are being made, policies are being shaped, agendas are being pushed, and it's all happening without the knowledge or consent of the people those decisions affect. Like a hidden hand is guiding the political process.
Yeah. And it raises really fundamental questions about the nature of power in a democracy. How much influence is too much? Where do we draw the line between legitimate political participation and undue influence by these secretive groups?
These are tough questions, but every democracy has to grapple with them. We want to encourage citizen engagement, diverse viewpoints, but how do we guard against those who are trying to manipulate the system, especially when they're operating in secrecy?
Right, there are no easy answers. But the first step is awareness, right?
Mm.
By shedding light on groups like El Yunque, understanding their history, their ideology, their methods, we can start to have a more informed conversation about the limits of acceptable influence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you've definitely given us a lot to think about today. El Yunque's story is a cautionary tale, I think, about the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of being vigilant in safeguarding democratic values.
And a reminder that power can be wielded in very subtle ways, and that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty.
Well said. Thank you for guiding us through this fascinating and at times kind of unsettling deep dive into the world of El Yunque. Listeners, we hope this episode has encouraged you to think critically about the forces that shape our world and to be active participants in protecting the values that are so crucial to a healthy democracy.